Today, I'm joined by Phil Simon, an award-winning author, keynote speaker, and consultant who's written 14 books where he often explores the intersection of technology, management, and the evolving nature of work. We'll be diving into his 13th book today, Low Code, No Code, Citizen Developers, and the Surprising Future of Business Applications. Welcome to the Caspio podcast, Phil. Great to have you here.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, before we dive in, for those that are not familiar with your work, could you please share a little bit about your background and yourself?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, I've written a bunch of books about a bunch of topics that loosely fall under the umbrellas of business, technology, data, and people. I'm a recovering college professor. I used to work in human resources a million years ago, and I spent probably 12 years helping companies implement enterprise resource planning systems. So in my books, hopefully I'm not just writing from sort of a theoretical perspective. A lot of these things I've seen firsthand. And when citizen development and low code, no code tools started to really come onto the scene in, I'd say, late 2022, I said, I really haven't seen too many books about this topic. So I went to Amazon and I did a quick search, and there were something like 30 books on the subject. And now I'm sure there are thousands for all sorts of reasons. But I chose to write this book because I felt like I was addressing a real need. And even though I can't predict the future, it was evident to me that the days of having to hire proper developers to build all apps were coming to an end. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of that today. So the book came out, it got translated in a couple of languages, and it seemed to find its way to you. So there's the success.
Yeah, I've been following you for some time on LinkedIn anyway, and but I think for me, when I read the book, and we'll obviously put all the links and things down at the onto this podcast at the end, but it was just really interesting to hear your perspective in terms of where low code, no code, and kind of the intersection and the really around the citizen developers was a different kind of angle for me. So it really resonated with me. I'm sure it will do with a lot of our listeners today. So what inspired you? What was kind of the main inspiration for you to start to put this into writing?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, there weren't a lot of books on the subject, which to me is definitely a sign, but I consider myself a citizen developer long before I ever heard the term. I think a Forrester analyst coined the term around 2014, but I go back to the late 90s when I used to develop pretty sophisticated Excel workbooks with macros and buttons, and then I graduated in Microsoft Access. So long before I knew the term, I knew that if it were up to me to fill out requirements documents and always send everything to the IT department by the time it would come back, it wasn't what I wanted. And in some cases, again, other than teaching a couple of years of information systems at Arizona State, in which we did cover some Python, and knowing enough SQL to be dangerous and some HTML and CSS, I am not a full stack developer. The tools had advanced to the point at which, this is why the cover of the book almost looks like the game Tetris, but then there's the mouse cursor. That's very much by design. And you can, these days, really build apps with a mouse as opposed to your fingers on a keyboard. And now, as I'm sure we'll talk about, you can even, with vibe coding and some of the tools like Replit and Lovable, you can even talk to your computer and have it build apps for you. So those things weren't around when I was writing the book. Certainly they weren't as mature, but they only underscore the fact that you no longer need to be a full stack developer to build something that I think the case studies show in the book can be extremely useful to organizations and to teams and departments.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was as you were going through the process of thinking about this book and you started to do some research and your interviews, was there anything that really surprised you?
Just the number of people, Paul, using these tools in different ways. I knew about some of the tools that I profiled in the book, but I discovered so many more. And I did not want the book to be just, here's how I used Microsoft Access or going back in the day, Crystal Report. So I found people who were using a wide variety of tools for a wide variety of reasons. One of my favorite examples is from a party planning company, and a kid who is probably half my age, who just decided that the way they were tracking trucks coming back when they were doing events was insane. And he knew there had to be a better way. So long story short, he independently developed a system with QR codes since every driver's got a cell phone.
Yeah.
And then he took that and he expanded that to letting people know their schedules because they used to cram it into, I kid you not, a 2-minute voicemail for 50 drivers. So it was a little bit like, and I'm totally dating myself here, that FedEx commercial in which the person's speaking at a mile a minute.
Yeah.
So just the number of tools and the ways people were using them. And I did think that there were some lessons to be learned. And that's why I thought it was also important to, without doing a full kind of study, detail some of the traits or characteristics of citizen developers, things like being curious and not accepting the status quo, which gets into some things I'm sure we'll talk about later, like shadow IT. But it was also comforting to know that I wasn't alone in my curiosity and impatience. And when people said, well, this is the system and we're not going to change it, and I'd say, well, your system is 20 years old. Does that come from heaven above? Or, maybe the technology has changed. So yeah, lots of pleasant surprises.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a take in the book as well. Caspio's been around for 25 years, actually, our anniversary this year, and we were the pioneer of low code. But I think it's interesting. I can see how our platform and the features and the services have changed over the 25 years. Did you see any trends over your research, and what's changed from your side, your research in terms of the past decade?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's start off with the variety of tools. Again, if you are thinking about low-code tools in the context of databases and things like Microsoft Access, that's great. But it is kind of limited, and not just in terms of the types of systems, but also in terms of the device. It's astonishing to me now how you can get to pretty much any data and enter any related data for these mainstream tools if you've got a phone, if you've got an iPad. And it's remarkable to me how you can capture different types of data, because we no longer live in a world in which, even though most people think of data as rows in a spreadsheet, I would argue that PDFs, email, photos, videos, all those things are data. And none of this would have happened if it weren't for, and I write about this in my 5th book, Too Big to Ignore: The Business Case of Big Data. If the cost of data storage hadn't dropped so significantly, everyone knows about Moore's Law, but most people don't know about Kreider's Law. And there's this great stat that I think it was in 1980, 1 megabyte of storage cost $1 million. And now, now you've got, was it when Google or Gmail dropped in, what was it, 2006 or 7 or something, whatever it was? They offered 5 gig of free storage.
I remember.
And that just was crazy. I mean, there have been so many different changes, but in some ways, to quote Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, but it also rhymes. Some of the issues that I think have plagued many of the citizen development initiatives, very similar to what we've seen 20, 30 years ago in the context of IT projects.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's also as well, is there any kind of misconceptions with low code, no code you were looking to challenge with the book?
Absolutely. First up, I will be the first person to admit that Apple is not going to run its supply chain on Airtable. Nothing against Airtable or any of the other vendors, and Caspio included, but there are certainly limitations to what some of these tools can do. But I think that if there was kind of a eureka moment for me in hindsight, and this is why this book is the 3rd and the 4th on a series of the future work, it's that COVID created all sorts of new application needs. For example, when everyone went to the office every day and you had a dedicated desk at which to sit, okay, but what if your company scales back its real estate footprint and it decides to go permanently hybrid, and it no longer needs 200,000 square feet every month? It could get by with 80. Well, that's wonderful, but unless you're dropping headcount by the same percentage, then you probably need some type of system for figuring out who sits where and when. And a spreadsheet or a Google Sheet isn't going to really satisfy that requirement. And that's just one example. So the premise is that there are all sorts of new needs, and IT departments are typically suffering with a backlog. If they cannot fulfill the needs, then again, the tools exist, the pricing models exist with SaaS and cloud computing. It's only natural for some people to say, well, I can't wait a year for IT to get its act together. We need something now. It may only give us 80 or 85% of what we need, but at least it gets us going, and we'll make do with what we have now as opposed to holding our breath and waiting a year and hopefully they'll develop a proper system. I think the other benefit from my perspective of low code, no code tools is that they significantly decrease, if not eliminate, the traditional IT business divide. I think I've got a few years on you, but I'm sure you've seen this movie a few times yourself. The business thinks they need X, the
Yeah.
IT department thinks they need Y,
Yeah.
and the people who are building the tool aren't the same ones who use it. So you've got unclear requirements. You've got developers sometimes who don't necessarily speak English as their primary language. And you get back a system or a report or whatever that doesn't meet your needs. And it just becomes frustrating with these no code, low code tools.
Yeah.
The people who need the tool and use the tools are the ones building the tools.
Yeah.
And to me, that is probably the single greatest benefit of them.
Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of customers that I speak to, they've come to Caspio because they've got a pain point or they're looking for an end goal, that type of thinking. And majority of the customers that come to us have no technical background. So they come with that pain point, looking for a solution, whatever that solution would be. And Caspio and low code will hopefully help them get to that end goal and eradicate any pain points they've got. And I've done, I think it's over 50 of these podcasts now over the last 2 years. And it's fascinating to see the backgrounds of some of these people that have come to us in the customers who have now been self-taught, watched the videos, played with the system and built some creative applications, which just are mind-blowing. So it just shows you how easy low code is to really, once you get your arms around this, to really build and develop and help you. And it's interesting with what you're saying there, because I was talking to a CEO recently, and he was talking about the need for maybe reducing their technical team, the development team, because by using low code and using our in-house professional services team, that's a big cost benefit to them and saving in terms of having a team of 10 people that would need to build something. So I think low code's definitely got a marketplace in many organizations, especially when they're looking at efficiency and cost savings.
Absolutely. One of the other surprises, kind of piggybacking on that, is that many proper techies will use these low code, no code tools. There's an example in the book of a guy who had built, I think using, it doesn't really matter which tool, but using one of them, I think in 10 minutes, an expense tracking application that could he have hacked together with JavaScript and Python and Visual Code and a back end and all that? He absolutely could, but he said there just isn't a need. So a couple of the people who reviewed the book said that I seem to look down on citizen developers. I really don't, but they still are developers. And you and I, I'm sure, would both agree that as a developer of any type, if you're building a tool for yourself and you're the only person who knows how it works and where you put things, naming conventions, all those kinds of quirks, that's fine. But if you want other people on your team, in your department, or in your organization to use it, then you need to think like a proper developer. Are you offering training? Are you offering support? Can people report bugs? What about enhancement requests? So I think that's something that your typical HR person who likes to play around with tools may not necessarily appreciate. So we all have to think like developers, even if we didn't grow up with Pascal or COBOL or some of those old programming languages.
Actually, Phil, it's a really good point, because we have that issue sometimes where a customer's built it themselves and then they leave the organization and then it's left with somebody, the application, nobody knows how it works, how it operates, how they can make changes to it. So we make sure from our side that we've got at least 2 to 3 people that know how to operate the application and make changes as well, because it's really important. And you're right, I think because it's a use case for that individual, it might not necessarily be for other people in the organization, or might not be aware of the benefits and how easy it is to use. So it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I mean, even the ability to roll back changes, which a lot of these tools now come with, because we all make mistakes. And if you're not documenting what you're doing, if there isn't any kind of version control, then someone could, because of turnover, jump in and make a change, and all of a sudden the system stops working. And then because of shadow IT and citizen development, you have someone who might say, well, look, I'm going to build my own version of X. And if 3 or 4 people do that in an organization, then it's only a matter of time. And you know this from your background, before you've got 3 or 4 different versions of the truth. And someone asks, I've had this happen in my consulting career. I worked at a startup. They were doing student loans. And someone said, how many customers do we have? Because I'm looking at the data and I can't tell. I go, no one knows the answer to that because
Yeah.
from a business point of view, you never defined what a customer was. So I
Yeah.
can run SQL statements all day long and tell you what's in the system, but I can't make the call that this is what you mean by a sale or a customer.
Yeah. I know obviously you've done a lot of research around this. Have you seen anything, what causes citizen development initiatives to fail?
Yeah, I can definitely rely on my experience, but there was also a CIMI study from 2018
Yeah.
about how the factors tended to be analogous to those that have plagued ERP and CRM implementations. I'm talking about scope creep,
Yeah.
lack of understanding the technology, basically human factors. If you tell me what I need to build and you're crystal clear, depending on the tool, I can build it. But
Yeah.
if I get four different answers from four different people about what I'm building and my priorities, and then no one shows up for training or testing or the data's crap when I load it in,
Yeah.
and guess what? I mean, I've seen this in my career when I worked at Merck. They were implementing PeopleSoft, and the VP of HR at the time, this is 1998, 1999,
Yeah.
used to brag about what great systems they had. And the open secret was that at the time, the system produced crap because we loaded crap in it. And in
Yeah.
order for
Yeah.
it to look good, you had dozens of people a week before the big meeting cobbling together spreadsheets and all these lists and then making it look pretty.
Yeah.
So I would suspect that the larger, more traditional slash stubborn organization with people who dismiss these types of tools will do worse than the 10-person startup in which everyone's tech savvy. And if there is legacy tech and a tolerance for mediocre systems, that just wouldn't fly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know,
Yeah.
to me, change management is enormous. And I've seen this researching some of my other books and
Yeah.
certainly during my career. If you can get on board with what you're doing and get everyone rowing in the right direction, it's no great insight here, but you're probably going to have a better chance of success than if you have departments actively working against each other because the VP or the CXO is just trying to run out the clock for 3 years until retirement.
Yeah. Have you seen kind of what successful governance model looks like for managing low code and no code across organizations? Because we've got obviously our own viewpoint from Casper as well, but interesting to get your perspective.
Yeah, I know that the Project Management Institute, actually one of the few books back in November of, I should say in June of 2022, when I decided to
Yeah.
write the book, one of the few books out there on citizen development came from PMI.
Right.
And when I leafed through that book, it was just obvious to me that I had a very different one in mind, and it was such a robust topic that's not surprising. So I have seen that they actually do formulate a certain type of methodology and ways that PMOs ought to be involved. I didn't really take that tact with this book. Yes, you want to have some governance over things because otherwise it's the wild, wild west. But
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen this in your career as I have. Sometimes those governance bodies are so bureaucratic that if you want anything done, you're going to have to wait 2 years. And the world just moves so quickly these days. To me, any successful governance model is going to have to react a lot faster than traditional ones. Again, this is at 1995 when you
Yeah.
were thinking about blowing away your CRM or your ERP or your data warehouse or whatever. And in 2 or 3 years, maybe you can make a decision. If you don't have a decent system and access to data when and where you need it, your
Yeah.
company may not be around in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. That's a good point. Just kind of building on that a little bit, you talked about like traditional development. Do you think low code and no code will eventually replace traditional development, or do you think they'll be coexisting?
I don't see how you answered this question without talking a little bit about AI. If you told me 2 years ago that you'd
Yeah.
be able to, or I guess Chat GPT 3.5 came out around the same day that my book dropped.
True. Yeah.
So let's just say 3 or 4 years ago, the idea that you could use natural language to
Yeah.
spit out systems. I think to answer your question, I do think that they'll have to coexist. A smarter person than myself once said, and I quote this person in the nine, AI won't replace your job. Someone using AI will replace your job. So to me, you have to lean into these tools.
Yes.
I'd say for simple systems, I mean, I used Replit to vibe code a very primitive workout app, just to see if I could do it. Again, that's a lot different than the supply chain of a Fortune 50 company.
Yeah.
But that same, and I'm changing right now my website content management system over from WordPress to Ghost. And as I look at some of the code I've created over the last 15 years, there's some mistakes. So I can throw that code now into Gemini or OpenAI's ChatGPT or whatever, and it could clean up the code.
Yeah.
And then I can paste that in. If you think about agentic AI, well, then why do I even need to do that? Right? Can't I just have it, if I trust it, say, go through all of my code, make whatever changes, and let me know when you're finished,
Yeah.
and let me know if you have any problems. So I have a hard time envisioning a future in which developers cease to exist. I do think they'll be more productive. And we've seen this with things
Yes.
like Copilot and Cursor. I mean, I'm hard pressed to think of a single tool right now, whether it's Salesforce or Tableau or some of the WordPress themes that are out there, that doesn't include AI. I mean, if you think
Yes.
about it, AI isn't necessarily going to be this standalone tool.
Yes.
It's going to be this feature, kind of like file save in every program.
Yeah.
Right?
And you're right, because we've got AI built into our platform and it's just speeding up the development. It's making it even easier than what it was before for customers to build applications as well. So I think it's only going to strengthen. Like I said, I think this conversation would have been very different just a few years ago, but obviously things are moving so fast now with AI. It's just kind of infiltrating all different companies and industries, and obviously low code and no codes also has been impacted as well.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned before about shadow IT. This is an interesting subject because a lot of companies and customers come to us, and it might be a big global Fortune 100 company, and it's their HR department that comes to us for low code to help with their pain point or make them more efficient. So it's interesting about the shadow IT, because what's your viewpoint on this in terms of how companies should or could empower non-technical employees so they don't create a shadow IT? Because I think I can see that happening.
Well, it's a lot like trying to prevent students, Paul, from using these AI tools.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can try, but something like 90% of college students use AI to help with their work or to just do their work.
Yeah.
So work under the assumption that people are going to use these tools, especially if the existing systems and applications don't meet their needs.
Yeah.
So pretending that these tools don't exist is absurd, because you cannot stop someone from bringing in a phone. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen this happen as well. You've got, the CMO says, I'll pay for this on my own personal credit card because
Yeah.
our current CRM is garbage and I've got results to hit. So pretending that people can't use tools whenever they want on whatever device they want, I think is a little absurd. You can try to lock things down with VPNs and threaten people and all that. But again, these tools I think are incredibly valuable. So knowing that people are going to use them, is there a way to use them in an intelligent and responsible manner? And not in terms of a single version of the truth and
Yeah.
security. It's also in terms of cost. Okta put out a study, I think 4 years ago, about how the average one of their clients used something like 85 different tools or web
Yeah.
services. And for some of their larger clients, it was 170. I'll bet you a Coke that in many cases, you have people who are paying for software, bloatware basically, that they're not using, or they're using 10% of an application because they don't know that if they switch to another application, they could get all they're needing here. So,
Yeah.
I do understand the need to try to centralize things to some extent. But if you're looking at your ERP or CRM or a portfolio management system or something, and you haven't made any improvements in 20 years, I can pretty much bet that you're behind in some way, and
Yeah.
there's probably someone like me or you in the organization who's going, "This is absurd. I'm not going to wait 5 years for you guys to figure this out. I'm either going to leave the
Yeah.
company or I'm going to use something independently, and if I get in trouble, then so be it." But I mean, it's absurd to me how there are, even though things are moving very quickly, and I get the fact that people like me are early adopters, you still have a lot of organizations that are using legacy tech
Yeah.
that's rooted, in some cases, I'm not making this up, in green screens.
Yeah.
They cannot use a mouse.
Crazy.
So maybe this
Yeah.
movement along low code, no code, and AI will encourage some of these companies to finally retire some of their legacy systems. And I think when they do, by definition, the need for shadow IT drops. I don't have any data on this, but I bet you that, maybe if it's a government agency, they lock things down.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
the older the legacy tech and the younger your workforce, the more likely that someone is basically leaning into shadow IT.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting perspective. There was an interesting quote that I spotted in your book. You wrote, "Foolish is the soul who believes any low code, no code tool is a panacea." What did you mean by this?
Yeah, there's no such thing, as you know, Paul, of a perfect system.
Yeah.
Different. Everyone always resists something, right? Also, if you've got organizational issues, you have teamwork issues, data issues, the fact that you're now using Caspio doesn't make all those go away. In fact, you could argue that introducing a new tool will actually unearth some problems because some people were probably pretty comfortable using legacy tech. I can remember one guy on a consulting project outside of Philly in
Yeah.
2005, I think, and he refused to upgrade from Access 95 or 97 because he was convinced that things would break. And I don't think he was right, but he was basically trying to just run out the clock until he retired. So, I do believe in the power of these tools. I would not have written this book if I felt otherwise. On the other hand, just because you're using insert name of best of breed, low code, no code tool doesn't mean that your organization is, quite frankly, kicking ass. It could still be suffering from all sorts of issues. And I also find that there's a generational issue. I did cite a little research in the book from what I was able to find about how some of the younger people, much more tech savvy, much more intolerant of legacy systems, were more likely to try these tools than basically someone my age who might say, well, that's the system. And if I just work here another 5 or 6 years, then I'll be fine.
Yeah.
So, I do think that they offer significant benefits, but be careful of the management consultant who says, "Oh, this will, the air will be cleaner, food will taste better." It's just crazy.
Yeah. No, you're right. So, Phil, from your perspective, then, for people that are listening to this and considering low code, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, definitely kick the tires on some of these tools. Also, I think it's important to realize that if a particular piece of software lacks what you consider to be a requirement, don't be surprised if that requirement is on every other vendor's roadmap. These vendors are, to paraphrase, I forget who said it, but it was something great artist steal. I don't know if it was Picasso. I think Steve Jobs used to quote that one a lot. But what's the pricing? Is your organization ready for this? Are people curious with new tools? Is IT going to get in the way? Have they embraced change in the past? And again, I think because who's going to develop it, and who's going to support it? If you do have, and there's this great. You ever read the book The Phoenix Project by Gene
I know
Kim?
which one you mean. Yeah.
Right. So there was this one employee in the book. I think his name was Brett, something with a B. It doesn't matter. He was the only one who knew how everything worked.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody like that in your organization and that person leaves and all that institutional knowledge goes poof, you could wind up in a world of pain. So, do you have the bed strength? And also, I'd argue that it's not a binary. It takes time to develop this kind of muscle memory. And I'm reminded here of when COVID hit, employees at what used to be Slack before Salesforce bought it, and Automatic, the company behind WordPress. Well, they were basically remote or hybrid to begin with. So they had years of muscle memory. The WordPress company Automatic has always been fully distributed. So when COVID hit, there really wasn't that much of a difference. But for 95 or 98% of the companies, now they were doing things on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype or WebEx or whatever. And they really struggled with it because they hadn't built up those tools. So, don't be surprised if you're a mature organization, if you don't see these immediate benefits, because it does take some time for people to adapt to new ways of doing things. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if IT folks dismiss no code because, again, knowing there are things these applications just can't do. If you think about it, everyone wants to be wanted.
Yes.
And in IT, if you've got this long backlog of things, that might mean that you're important and your job is secure. And think about it. We live in an era of AI. You probably saw that 5-Air interview a few weeks ago from the CEO who said basically we've all got months before AI eats us all alive. Now, who knows if that's true? But hopefully the book, by framing the arguments in a way that makes people think, because I don't have all the right answers. There's no chart in the back that says if you're a healthcare organization with 2,000 employees and you're in the US and you're founded in the last 20 years, then you need these tools for these reasons. That's insane. But hopefully it provides a framework for thinking about these kinds of issues.
Yeah, no, Phil, thank you for sharing that. Some great advice. And as I've already said to you, I think it's an amazing book in terms of just kind of your perspective, very unbiased. And because you're not a typical developer writing a book like this, you've got different perspectives and different thoughts, which I think listeners will find really interesting if they're considering low code, or even if they're they're just in the SaaS world, I think they'll find your perspectives very interesting. But I did want to ask you, if you could rewrite the book today, is there one thing you'd add or you'd leave out?
If I were writing it today, I would be all over model context protocols,
Yes.
or MCPs. They are, I'm just getting my head around them, but it is remarkable how you can basically get applications to do what you want them to do without anything resembling code.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a great tweet that came out. I think it was around the time the book dropped, and it still applies. Something like the most popular programming language today is English. So that, but no, I like to think, hindsight's always 2020. I do mention at the very end of the book is the future of coding your voice. And then when ChatGPT 3.5 came out in November of 2022, I said, all right, well, I didn't get that one right. But now that I think about some of these tools like Whisperflow and how you can talk to Gemini, and I mean, you can talk to Siri, but Siri doesn't understand what the hell you're saying. But hopefully they'll fix that soon. Maybe we are getting to a point at which, even though I didn't get the particular company right, you will be able to just talk to a machine and it'll build applications. Not all of them, but I'm pretty proud with how it came out. I admit I'm still pretty proud of the fact that I conceived of the cover because I'm a fan of the game Tetris, and it did seem like the perfect embodiment. And when I took that to my cover designer, he said, "Oh, I totally know what you're going for." And then even things like the dark mode and the cursor with my name, those are in the tags.
Yeah.
There are little Easter eggs there, and I'm a big fan of movies and music and TV shows that drop little hints there. So, I don't think it's the greatest book ever written, but I definitely don't think it sucks.
No, I think it's great. And it's like I say, we'll put the links in here so people can get hold of the book, and your LinkedIn details as well, so people can follow you and explore and go a little bit deeper as well. But Phil, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure our listeners will find it really insightful, especially from your perspective as well. So again, thank you for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Paul.